So, to kvetch or not to kvetch? For those who don't know what kvetch means, kvetch is the Yiddish word for to whine, to complain, and so on. And as you saw, the title of the class is do you have to be Jewish to kvetch, or does kvetching make you a Jew? So let's talk about that for a moment, and it is related to the parsha. But first, let's say a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyah bidvaro. Today, because of the frigid weather in South Florida, didn't we all move from New York so that we don't have to deal with this? Because of the frigid weather in South Florida. So today I made myself a hot chocolate instead of. Sorry, I got cut off, so I'm piecing together two pieces of the video, but let me continue over here. So it says, Vayavo Marosa, they came tomorrow, they couldn't drink, and Vayilonoam is what I was in the middle of translating, and they kvetched. They went ahead and they kvetched to Moshe Rabbeinu, they complained, and they said, Ma nishta, what should we drink? And later on again in the parsha, it says, and they kvetched. You know, I was talking to somebody who went through just a little bit on the lighter side, who went through a proper Orthodox conversion, and I sort of jokingly asked them some serious questions about their conversion and their love, true love and dedication for Judaism. But then I also asked them, do you find yourself kvetching more that you have joined the Jewish faith? So that is on the lighter side. But what is this about, what is this about all the kvetching? So I want to answer that question. And, how do you reduce kvetching? Where does kvetching come from? But I want to address another question. The question is, the beginning of the Torah portion, it says, Vayehi b'shalach Paro, and it was when Pharaoh sent away the Jewish people. And one of the commentaries asks, Vayehi b'shalach Paro, the Talmud tells us that this language, Vayehi, and it was, when Pharaoh sent away the people, has a connotation of sadness, of some sort of negativity. And what is the negativity? This sounds like such a wonderful, exciting, miraculous, monumental, historical occurrence. Pharaoh sends the Jewish people out of Egypt. What is this sort of somewhat sad, negative, reluctant introduction? Vayehi, and it was, which the Talmud says has a negative connotation, or a sad connotation, or a tzoros connotation. Why so? So to answer some of these questions, I want to answer with I proceed with another question, and the question over here is, l'chaim, to all my dear friends here listening. The parsha continues. In the beginning of the portion continues. Let's read the holy words of the Torah. The portion continues in the beginning of the portion. It talks about as the Jewish people travel in the desert. So it says, Hashem holech lifneim yomam ba'amud onan lanchotam haderach. Hashem, God, was traveling before them by day with an amud onan, with a pillar of a cloud, to show them the way. V'layla, and at night, ba'amud eish, with a pillar of fire, lahoyer lahem, in order to give them, to illuminate, to give light, to give them light, laleches, so they could travel both yomam v'layla. So they needed this seemingly they needed this sort of guide, this cloud, to show them how to get from Egypt to Israel. This was an incredible miracle. And one of the commentaries asks, I believe it's the Tiferet Shmuel, asks, it's not that complicated to get from Egypt to Israel. It's not complicated. Why do they need this sort of miraculous cloud to show them how to get from Egypt to Israel? In fact, not in fact, but between, I don't know, probably 2 million people that were now traveling. Moses himself was a traveler. He was a Midian. He traveled. You need this miraculous. God doesn't just perform miracles for stam kacha, just because. So they needed this. I remember years ago, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago or 20 years ago, before phones became so popular, smartphones that is, and then we had our Garmin's, the GPSs that we had in our cars. And there was a Israeli company that was advertising, pushing for some model of the newest and best GPS. And they show a little video, a little ad, where Moses and Aaron are traveling with all the Jews behind them, and at some point they turn to each other and they say, "We're lost. Where are we going? We don't know how to move on in the desert." And all of a sudden, from heaven, there's this thunder, and from the heaven a beautiful GPS comes down. They look at it, says, now we know how to go." So that's an ad, cute ad for an advertise for a company for GPS. The question is, what is this Anan? What is this? Why do we need this cloud? And the Tiferes Shmuel gives a beautiful answer. Tiferes Shmuel tells us, and this relates to Beshalach Paro. It answers both these questions. The Tiferes Shmuel tells us that the cloud leading the Jewish people, Lanchosam Haderach, was a message for them to know as they're traveling through the desert, and the challenges that came with it, and the dangers, scorpions, snakes, enemy nations, as we see they had to face while they were traveling. The cloud told them not only, first and foremost, that there's Hashem's protection, and also told them that wherever they're going, wherever you find yourself, whether it's going forward or seemingly backward, know this: Hashem is the one that is leading you and is the reason why you are at a given place. To use the words of the Tehillim of King David, Hashem, from God, mitzadei kevekeinanu, the steps of man are determined. But even more so, not only are the steps of man determined, but there's a cloud, there's a which represents the presence of Hashem, is always there with you, wherever you may be. I was talking in shul today, or yesterday on Shabbat. I'm pre-recording this class, I'm saying today, but Sunday, Saturday night. So, last week, without giving away details to keep it confidential, so I don't share who this person was, but I met with someone, and I say this, I want to back up for a moment. Let me back up. In the last 2.5 years, we went through a very difficult time. This last, of course, because of the October 7th attacks, the rise of anti-Semitism, seemingly good people are so misled. And on the other hand, there's no question that the cloud of God has been with us. What I mean, the cloud of God in this sense is that we've had Hashem's presence being seen so clear. Not that we understand why I want to stress this again and again, not that we understand or justify, but we definitely have seen the hand of Hashem. And I say this on both ends, and this is the sadness of Beshalach Parai, is that even after all these miracles and the 10 plagues, the reason why the Torah says Vayehi Beshalach Paro in a sad connotation, as mentioned in the beginning of the class, is because despite all these miracles, there were many who still believed that Paro was sending them out of Egypt, as opposed to God and his miracles and Moses and Aaron taking them out of Egypt. As we say in the Hallel, we sing in the Hallel, for those who remember, we say in the Hallel, we also use a term when the Jews went out of Egypt. But there we say the famous song, B'tzeit Yisrael mim Mitzrayim, which means when the Jews left Egypt, went out of Egypt. But here we say, Vahi b'shalach Paro. It was when Pharaoh sent them. The sadness is that people still gave credit to Pharaoh for sending them out of Egypt. This past week, talk about the last 2 years, 2.5 years, October 7th, this past week, there was a lot of emotion in amongst the Jewish world and in Israel specifically, because the last hostage, Ran Gvili, was the last hostage left in Gaza. For 14 years, we've had one of our brothers or sisters kidnapped, alive or deceased or murdered in Egypt. In Gaza. And this was a pain, a constant pain for all of us. This past week, and one of the headlines here in the United States, I'm not mentioning here on the recording which newspaper this was, as not to give this the sort of a political, everybody gets very sensitive, and that's not my objective over here, is to focus in on one newspaper. And it was more than one newspaper, but a very prominent newspaper in this country. The headline was not "Last hostage leaves Egypt, Baruch Hashem, thank God." The way the headline was, Hamas gives back the last. It was crediting Hamas, which deserves no credit. It was crediting Hamas. Although hundreds of soldiers and so much intelligence and pressure and whatever Israel had to do was taken in order to get this last hostage back. So instead of saying Israel secures the last hostage, Hamas has, giving that credit to Hamas. It's just incredible. It's just incredible the bias or the outright hate. But let's focus on positivity over here. This is the two sides over here. Vahi b'shalach Paro. Paro is the one who sent them out. Why would the Torah say that? Because there was that reluctance to face the absolute truth. It was Hashem that sent them out of Mitzrayim. Pharaoh doesn't deserve any credit. He only did it because he feared for his life. The Anan, the cloud, representing God's presence, that is what we must always know, both when we go forward and when there are setbacks, which we don't understand. We need to know it's the cloud of Hashem, and that in itself gives us comfort. The last 2.5 years, we spoke about this, and the reason I mentioned this particular story is because I met with a dear friend, and he shared with me the following story, and actually a very sort of interesting discussion ensued, and a bit of an argument, and I want to present to you, my dear friends, and I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear your feedback and tell me what your opinion is, as I will elaborate and explain in a moment. So I had dinner, dear friend, and the friend said to me that his child, who recently graduated from Harvard, she has what we call a Yiddish cup. She's a very bright child. His friend says his child graduated from Harvard during this whole period of time where there was in Harvard the crown of our education system, where there was the horrible hate and protest and violence against Jewish students. And as a result of that, he says his daughter, who was more what we would call more liberal leaning, which is common in educational institutions throughout this country, especially in their elite institutions, became, as a result of October 7th and what they were seeing, a lot more, I wouldn't say, conservative per se, but more connected to their roots, connected and proud of supporting Israel. It touched their soul to the extent the story was shared with me, that when he went to visit his child, his daughter was wearing, either was a chai or a Jewish star, and he, being a dad, and as a father, you're always worried, of course, of the safety of your child, said perhaps you shouldn't be wearing the star like that, because those protests were going on as he was there. Maybe you should hide it so that we don't, not to endanger yourself. And she said, no, I'm proud of who I am. I'm proud of and I want to stand. I want to stand with my people. I want to stand with those in Israel. I want to stand with justice. I want to stand with what's right. And to make a long story shorter, not short, but shorter, as they were walking, of course, the mob and agitators, many of them not even from Harvard, but just agitators, these people, either because they hate or because they have nothing what to do in their life, and whenever there's a reason to agitate, they agitate. Some gators, people have nothing, whatever, different reasons of why people agitate. Sometimes justified, and sometimes misled, of course, and sometimes just raw anti-Semitism. So they were walking, and a couple of these protesters or rioters stood in their way and said, "I'm sorry, you're a Zionist. I don't know the exact language, but you cannot walk here." And this friend of mine, the dad, who's not a young man, he's not like in his 30s where he could, said to them, "Look, this is the United States of America, and we I pay tuition for this college, and I'm going to walk. You're not going to stop me from walking here on the university because of your hate." And just said, "I'm walking, so get out of my way," and started to walk. And then he was grabbed by the shoulder, and he turned around and he punched the guy straight on into his jaw. Then the police came, a commotion happened, they wanted to arrest him, not going into all the details of the story. So I mentioned this in my speech. And this is a little bit of going off on the main point of the class, but the reason why I mentioned this in my speech is to point out that that all this that we've endured, or all this challenge, hate, anti-Semitism, we have to understand that there is a point to it, not to justify it in that sense, but there is a way of dealing with it in terms of our faith, because this parsha is full of faith, knowing a cloud of Hashem's presence is always with us. And even in the setbacks, there is a light that comes from it. Sometimes we see it, sometimes we don't. In this particular case, there was a light in terms of bringing out the deeper soul of both child and father in their connection to their roots, in their connection and standing up for what's right. That deeper connection is so important and needed and necessary, and has sort of implications and it bears fruit for all of life, of father, child, next generation, what you tell your children, what you witnessed, how you responded, how you stood up, and so on. That's all part of the cloud of Hashem that goes there with you. But as a side point, after I gave this talk, the old story, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And it's okay. It's okay to have differences of opinion as long as it's respectful and so on. So I'm approached by a member of the community and says to me, respectfully, sort of critiques me and says that, as a rabbi, you have to be important. You have to be careful. And when you say something, people take you seriously and they almost look at it as a call to action. And I think that the father who turned around and punched the guy in the face or in his jaw acted out of line, or not acted inappropriately, because we are not violent people. He should have gone over to the police rather than be violent on his own right. And he said to me, because I know, Rabbi, you are more conservative, or you're more, and it is true that religious Jews, Torah Jews, tend to be more conservative. Not necessarily, I want to make this clear, not necessarily in the way it's divided in society at large, but more traditional, obviously with marriage and values and defending yourself, etc. There's areas where Judaism is more liberal in terms of collective responsibility and so on. So we've had this class and discussion at other times. But the accusation was that because you tend to be more conservative, you are seem to be endorsing what this father did. And I said, yes, I do agree with that, because when you're here and you're being grabbed and you're in a threatening situation like that by people that are hateful, you have every right to defend yourself and so on. Okay, that was a discussion. We had a discussion back and forth. I then came home. I had a group of teenagers at my home for the Shabbat meal, and we had a very nice Shabbat meal with words of Torah, and I brought up the question, and I wanted to hear their opinion. What do they think? Do they agree with my take on this? Do they agree with this congregant's take? And we had a heated, passionate, respectful discussion. And I really would like to hear some comments. And coming back, I heard from Rabbi Jacobson this past week. Rabbi YY, for those who know, great teacher and speaker. He says when he started as a young man to teach and to give classes and lectures, he met Rabbi Steinsaltz, the great scholar Rabbi Steinsaltz, and he asked him for some advice in developing his sort of speaking career. And one of the things Rabbi Steinsaltz told him was something quite simple, but sometimes the simple things is what we overlook. He says, surround yourself with people who are going to give you honest critique or honest disagreement. They're not just going to tell you, a wonderful speech is fantastic. If they disagree with you, you should have people who can give you honest, true feedback. So I would like to hear what you, the listeners, think about that particular story. But getting back to our discussion here, our Torah discussion, Kvetching essentially comes from a place. Please forgive me. Let me back up a second. The cloud, the anan, lanchosem, to show them the way, tells us, as mentioned in the beginning, wherever we are, whatever situation we are, whether we understand it, whether we agree with it, we have to know Hashem is there in our journey. There's a wonderful story that's been published by the people who were there on video through GEM, Jewish Educational Media, that publishes stories with the Rebbe. And there was, every single year, for many years already, there's a national women's convention run by the Neshei Chabad, the women of Chabad. And this is going on for years. And they would pick different locations throughout the country that hosted this women's convention, the Chabad Women's Convention, with inspirational speakers and taking on resolutions and so on. At one of these conventions, after the convention is over, and I think it was in Minnesota, but I could be wrong. Minnesota's in the news, unfortunately. And so they were coming back. They were in the airport, a group of women that came from New York, and a major snowstorm broke out. We had Minnesota this past week. We had a snowstorm up north and much of the country. And it was either Thursday evening or Friday morning, and they were concerned that they will not make it back for Shabbat. You can't fly on Shabbat. So they called up the Rebbe's office, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and the convention was organized by the instructions, motivation, inspiration, guidance of the Rebbe, and they wanted a blessing, some bracha, a blessing, a holy blessing from a tzaddik, from the Rebbe, that they should be able to make it home for Shabbat. So when they called up the office, the Rebbe's secretary answered, and the way they expressed their request for a blessing, they said the following. I'm paraphrasing, that the group from New York that wants to come participate in the convention, we are stuck in the airport. And they received an answer. This is the following answer, and it's such a beautiful answer. The Rebbe responded through the secretary, a Jew is never stuck. If you end up in a given place, there is a positive reason for you being there. You're not stuck. They took that message seriously. They had many Shabbat candles with them. After receiving that answer, they sort of fanned out throughout the airport and gave out Shabbat candles to Jewish women and daughters so that they could add light and light Shabbat candles every Friday before Shabbat. I don't remember the end of the story, whether they made it home for Shabbat or not. I don't remember. That's sort of irrelevant for this discussion. A Jew is never stuck. Kvetching comes about when things don't go your way, or you think it's not going your way, you kvetch. The antidote to kvetching is, remember that there is Anan, there is a cloud representing Hashem that is always there on your journey, collective, national, personal journey. When you really understand that, you really internalize that, there's no reason for kvetching. What are you kvetching about? Not only is there no reason for kvetching, whichever situation you find ourselves, your answer is, the chief rabbi of Israel once came to the Rebbe in a private audience. And it was, I believe, after the 6-Day War, or the Yom Kippur War, I think it was after the Yom Kippur War, the Matzav Ruach, the mood in Israel was very down. And he said, the chief rabbi of Israel was in a private audience with the Rebbe, and he gave the Rebbe an update on what's going on and the mood in Israel, because the Yom Kippur War was a very difficult war. And he concluded by saying to the Rebbe, "Was wird sein?" What will be? And the Rebbe's response was, a Jew does not ask what will be. A believing person doesn't ask what will be. A believing person says, what can I do, or what should I do? When you know that the Anan of Hashem, the cloud of God, as it says in this week's parsha, representing Hashem, is there with you, showing you the way, your answer to your kvetching, to your dissatisfaction is, I'm here because the cloud brought me here. Again, cloud not as in darkness, but cloud in representing Hashem's presence. That's why I'm here. And being here, what am I going to do in the most positive way that aligns with the mission and why Hashem brought me here? There's no question that if we internalize that, without a doubt, that's the best antidote for kvetching. And that's the best antidote to follow the cloud ultimately to the promised land, to Israel, as Am Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael were on this journey as they left Egypt, representing all our personal journeys and again collective journeys to the Messianic era as promised to us by the prophets. As we all do our part in that journey, then collectively we will get there happily in a way that we see light, not in a painful way, not in a way that we've gone through in the last two and a half years, but in a way where we see openly God's kindness. Not only that it's hidden and we have to try to figure it out, but we should see so openly with the immediate and speedy coming of our holy and righteous Mashiach, as promised in all the prophets. Have a wonderful, fantastic, light-filled week.